Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us as we explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How was your Thanksgiving, Dave?
Good. I had my a crown put on one of my teeth.
If you can still say it after having the crown put on.
I had, yeah. So, but it was cleared up before Thanksgiving, which was my great fear. Yeah, I don't know how or why I thought that it might be a good idea to schedule a dentist appointment the day before Thanksgiving.
Risky.
But yeah, it knocked out our show though, because I was there for 5 hours. So it had a reverberative effect upon everything. So
yeah. Well, while you were doing that, we were having the longest drive ever from New York to Harrisburg. A little bit because of traffic, although that wasn't the major cause. But we stopped, we thought, for a quick bite to eat at Cracker Barrel, which is our go-to place. And it took an hour for the food to be prepared. And we were trying to call in advance and their website wasn't working. We finally got there. We put the order in right away. And it took an hour before we finally got out of the parking lot. So anyway, I would say your day was more painful than ours, but our travel wasn't without its challenges. Once we got there, though, we had a great time with our parents. Really enjoyed that. My Aunt Susie as well. So that was a good time. Nice to be back to the Thanksgiving routine after, so many things not being routine for the last year and a half.
that would be a good challenge. What is worse, East Coast traffic the Wednesday before Thanksgiving or the dentist's office?
Yeah.
Make your pick. It's both are probably somewhere in some circle of Dante's hell.
Right.
But,
Either what you're looking to do, right, if you don't have to. But I still think, with all the frustrations we faced, I would rather have done that than what you were going through. So
yes, I think I agree with that.
Patriots.
So Aristotle, book 4, part 3, continuation of this discussion of forms of government. And I think the key to remember here once again is that Aristotle wants to take a more deliberate approach to studying regimes, and he wants to train his reader to open their eyes or have better eyesight with regard to the complexity that goes into one nation or one city or one political community being different from another. So he really picks up with this theme again as he gets into part 3 of book 4. He says that the reason why there are many forms of government is that every state contains many elements. In the first place, we see that all states are made up of families, and in the multitude of citizens, there must be some rich and some poor, and some in the middle condition. The rich are heavy-armed, and the poor are not. And from there on, he'll talk about how the common people are different from one another. Some are husbandmen, and some are traders, and some are artisans. And then even among the wealthy, there are wealthy people who keep horses and can afford to, and those who cannot. So the trained political eye in trying to assess why a constitution is the way it is and why offices are organized the way they are has to take a look at these varieties that define any community. Politics is a complex topic because of the diversity of types. God didn't make us as replicants to one another. We're not equal to one another in every aspect, every part of our lives, everything that we do. There's difference, and that difference makes a big difference in our world.
Well, I think there's a couple of different levels we can look at on this. One of the things that seems to be a regular trope on the TV debates is, why isn't America more like country X? And it's usually like Europe collectively. And there's not a lot of nuance, because if you actually look at Europe is quite complex. There's no actual monolithic Europe on any issue, but we maybe think that way because we look at it from such a distance and we notice differences there from America. But one of the things that we've been trained on through our study of de Tocqueville and now with Aristotle is to see, well, actually, there are some important historical differences, cultural differences. You talk about the language of mores that is so central to de Tocqueville's analysis. I think Aristotle is very helpful here because we can think about democracy as a single approach to politics. But again, once we get in any kind of serious study of different countries where democracy has been established, we can see there are lots of differences that are significant, different kinds of democracy. And those are all, or almost all, rooted in deep historical and cultural norms, some of which we really can't even perhaps discover the origins of at this point, but which nevertheless have a profound influence on how people experience politics within that big umbrella of democracy. And I think Aristotle is very helpful in this chapter in pointing us in that direction, because we do the same thing within our country, right? We can talk about the variety within our country and the regional differences and the economic differences and the ideological differences, and think about how that influences democracy in New York State from democracy in Texas and democracy in California and Alaska, et cetera.
I think what Aristotle is suggesting to us just in presenting the topic the way that he does is that variance is good, that difference is good, because if your coverage of politics is just reduced to there are rich people and there are poor people, then you're more likely to have a battle between those who are labeled rich and those who are labeled poor. So the simplification of politics to here's a group of haves and here's a group of have-nots, and this is unjust, and we have to overcome this injustice, will tend to a war between those two groups. And I think it's prophetic also because when you take a look at more modern dissent movements within the West, you think primarily here of Marx. Marx is suggesting, right, that all politics can be reduced, right, to those who control the mode of production and those who don't. And then what is necessary? Well, a revolution is necessary over the bourgeois that will produce a great and final state of affair where there'll be no haves and no have-nots. So Marx's hope, right, is to move to a complete homogeneity. And that's a lot of what drives modern ideology of all different sorts, this desire to get rid of difference, get rid of variance, and create just one type, which always happens to be how I'd like things done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And of course, if you were to accomplish that, then I guess all the challenges and conflicts by definition disappear. But since we have no expectation of actually being able to accomplish that, there's a whole lot of conflict that comes along in the effort to do away with those differences. And I think it's one of the things that, Madison could have learned from Aristotle in his preparations and thinking about faction and Federalist 10 and other places, that the more variety you have, the more moderate the regime tends to be. And so the solution for Aristotle, whenever you have an imperfect regime, is not more of that regime. It's balancing it with some elements of other imperfect regimes so that you create a more moderate mixture rather than a purer form of a regime that's not actually seeking the common good. And so just like you're saying, the economic variety and the other forms of variety that we observe are good things that tend to make it more difficult for anyone to absolutize their claims. And even if you would create a kind of one size fits all pattern for the world in your own image, you're very unlikely to be able to do that if we maintain the kind of diversity that we have in thinking and economic interests and the rest.
Well, and then if you bring it up to the present day political situation in the United States, I think that if you were to look at what Aristotle's after here, right, that balancing that comes by having that diversity and that difference, and even Madison's hope, right, in Federalist 10, that because we enlarge the orbit of our politics, because we have a larger republic. It'll be less likely to be a divisive republic, as has undone many republics in the past. But when you look at American politics in the year 2021, we seem to have these touchstone movements or issues that always seem to spark this division between Group A and Group B. And you don't have to look that far. You look at what we've dealt with the last 18 or 20 months with COVID, right? That it's a very divisive subject, and you can pretty much line people up on one side or another ideologically on the issue, right? That there are very few people who have been able to escape, right? Being drawn in, right, to a more ferocious assessment of the issue. And we had a very nice family who had moved out from California to Texas, moved to Tyler, Texas, where Rachel's from, and they were very much against vaccines, and yeah, it dominated the conversation. I mean, I think 3 of the 4 hours they were there was vaccine talk, and as if there's not anything else other to talk about than vaccines. Right. But I imagine that was probably the conversation of a lot of tables this Thanksgiving, and it's I think it speaks to a kind of a dangerous new trend, right? If we let ideology overcome our minds, everything we see, then we're gonna tend toward these groupings that might on every issue want to challenge one another.
Yeah, one of the really interesting insights on party that you have in the Federalist 50, one of the less well-known Federalist essays in the series dealing with the separation of powers, but Madison's analyzing the debates that happened in a Pennsylvania legislature that was reviewing a report that was, according to the Constitution, supposed to be produced every 7 years to see how the government was actually following the Constitution. Very interesting thing. It'd be fun to do this every 7 years, right? Yeah. Do an audit. And did the executive branch break the Constitution? If so, how? Did the legislative branch break the Constitution? If so, how? And what we found, as we analyzed this report, was that you had these parties that would emerge, and the way that you saw it was party was that people on issues that were entirely distinct were yet voting the same way, right? So there was something about pre-existing attachment to this person or this group or dislike for that group that was getting in the way of any kind of rational analysis of the questions. Because if you have different questions that really require different kinds of analysis, and yet people are always lining up the exact same way, then it's probably not careful analysis that's determining the vote, right? Mm-hmm. It's some pre-existing passion or attachment that's guiding you. Why would you always reach the same conclusion as this person on questions that are fundamentally distinct, unless there was something more going on than just kind of a clear-sighted analysis of it? So this is where we are. I mean, this is our politics through and through. We have our teams, and we root for our teams, passionately root for our teams. We engage in the conflicts of our teams. We often hypocritically criticize the other team for doing the same thing that our team does, but we don't see it when it's our team doing it, or we read it a different way, interpret it a different way. And so just like you're saying, like an issue, COVID doesn't really have to be a matter of partisan divide. There's obviously going to be policy questions that will be political, and those may follow along pre-existing patterns, but there's certain elements of it that just shouldn't be immediately political or ideological anyway. And yet we find that our divisions are so deep that we sort out very quickly, right, according to those pre-existing lines of demarcation.
And you begin to wonder when you look back through history whether or not is this going to be the way of human affairs? You have Jew and Gentile, you have Christian and pagan, you have Protestant and Catholic, right? There were these breakdowns, right, all along the way. So the modern hope, right, and the modern Republican hope, at least in the United States, that you could have a diversity of types may be overcome, by this continual historical repetition, to want to view yourself as being on a certain team and have a clear view as to who the enemy is, right? There's friend and there's enemy, and then that's it. And I think it's even a deeper question for those in the body of Christ, because which team are you on? Is your team the red team or the blue team, or do you identify with Christ, right? And is your identity there central? I think that's hard. It's been very hard for a lot of Christians, right, to identify with Christ rather than identify with red or with blue.
Yeah, and you think about the teaching in Romans and Corinthians on how you ought to accommodate the weaker brother, right? So you might be quite convinced that this position you've taken on vaccines or masks or whatever the COVID-related issue is absolutely right, and yet are you able to accommodate the weaker brother on this point, right? Are you able to view somebody who's come to a different conclusion and who you may think is misguided in that conclusion, and nevertheless have that brotherly care for them that makes you willing, as Paul did and notes in a number of places in his writings, to give up your rights. You could claim your right to X, Y, or Z, but you can also give up your rights, right? This is one of the things that Christians need to learn, that rights actually aren't unalienable. It's one of the mistakes in the Declaration of Independence to say that our rights are unalienable, which means we can't give them up, right? That means that if that's true, that means that your chief end is to vindicate your rights, and that's a mistake, right? It's not the highest human purpose to vindicate your rights. Of course, you have rights that ought to be respected. Governments have a duty to protect those rights. Others have a duty to respect those rights, but you can give up your rights. Christ gave up his rights. Paul gave up his rights and did so for a higher purpose. And so that's something that Christians, I think, especially American Christians, have to really learn, that it's okay to give up your rights, and it's okay to set aside a privilege that may be rightfully yours for the sake of caring for that weaker brother, for that weaker sister who needs to see something more than your invocation of rights or law as you interact around the issue of COVID or any number of other questions that can easily divide churches and Christians.
And it's hard to do. And I think it's harder to do, right? Because I think that a clear-sighted view of the political situation, and you get this from even non-Christians like Tocqueville, is that the major modern development is this creation of a mortal God, of an earthly Leviathan that is assuming a great amount of power and wants to assume a great amount of administrative power over the lives of all, and that is really aiming to supplant God and God's authority. So this is it's a very clear and present danger, right? The growth of this mortal God, this growth of this Leviathan. But then how do you act the part of maintaining your identity in Christ and realizing that, okay, it'd be wonderful to have a victory over that Leviathan, but that's not the true victory, right? The true victory that has already been won by Christ, and that's the community that I'm going to be part of. That's going to be the victory that produces the eternal peace. Not just simply beating back the Leviathan, even though beating back the Leviathan is a good thing.
Right. That's right. So how invested are you in that, and how willing, and this is, I think, one of the real challenges on the right today, how willing are you to use any means necessary in order to secure that victory, right? Are you willing, are you choosing to gain the whole world while you lose your soul? No. And of course, you're not going to gain the whole world, right? You might gain a momentary victory over the ruling class, the deep state, the whatever you want to call the opponent in all this, right? But it will be a temporary victory. And this is one of the great mistakes often made in American political analysis, is to assume that every victory is some kind of final victory. It's embarrassing the number of books that are written every 4 years after a party wins a presidential election and does well in the congressional election. So that's because of some demographic trend that will certainly last forever, right? You will never have a Republican president again. or Democrats have lost it forever because they've lost the suburbs, or they're winning the suburbs and now they're going to win forever. And, we have this kind of breathless analysis every 4 years, even every 2 years, sometimes after a midterm election. And, wait 2 more years and the analysis will be in an entirely different direction. And someone else will have figured out some other law of politics that's certain to guarantee this party's victory forever. And so, you come back to Aristotle and other wise observers, and you see, no, actually these human things are pretty resilient. This kind of variety and division. You think back to the debates early on in American political history between the Jeffersonian vision for an agrarian society versus Hamiltonian vision to buttress a manufacturing society along with that. And Hamilton wanting a more diverse economy, and Jefferson worried about the influence of industry on the independence of the worker. And, interesting debate. You can review the arguments on both sides, but you can see these competing visions. And then even at that early stage, the beginnings, because Hamilton wins in some ways this debate, of a diversifying economy that produces the kind of variety that seems only to have multiplied rapidly in the years since. I mean, how many different industries and divisions within industries do we now have in the American economy?
Yeah. And probably like a final point on this is you wonder, not a final point, but I think a final thought on this, you wonder whether or not geography is enough of an alleviating force on this debate. I mean, that was the hope, right, of Madison, right, that our unique geography, the fact that we would extend over the course of a continent, would allow for those differences. Will it have the same effect in the 21st century? When, yes, geographically we may be far from one another, but if the winds of division can spread quickly over the internet, over the screen, or whatever you see, then there may not be an escape from this division, unless you turn the technology off. You make a really great effort to focus on trying to live a godly existence in community with others. I think there many people are kind of searching for the answer to that question. Okay, well, where's the escape from this madness? And so you have the answer, Matt?
Yeah, just give me 5 minutes. I can lay that out for you.
Sure. Okay.
No, I don't. But I think everyone recognizes, like you're saying, that there's problems, and a lot of those problems are connected with social media, with kind of immediacy of information, with the way that influences our emotions, our patterns of thought. Just one thought about this. What if we all tried to spend as much time reading a book, like a real book, as we do scrolling through things online, right? More time with the permanent things, or at least with the things with a long track record behind them, right? Read an old book, a book that's been around for 100 years or 500 years, or the scriptures of 2,000 years and 3,000 years, and allow yourself to have the perspective that comes from that, rather than the latest Twitter outrage, or the thing that's on the news is so crazy that you've got the story that they're actually presenting, but then they have to have the thing running across the bottom, right? Because, well, there's something even more important that's happening just this moment while we're talking about something else. Don't forget about this. So we have to back off from that and those momentary trivialities that are so influential, even in just setting our the course of our day, right? How do you feel getting up? Well, what's the first headline you read, and how does that influence you? And get some perspective on things that can come from unplugging a little bit and reading things that aren't so transient in their nature.
I always say when I cover Aristotle that what he's trying to perform here is almost like what an eye doctor does. He's trying to correct our sight lines. Mm-hmm. And just in thinking through these last kind of, is there a way around this? well, we have to have our sight lines corrected, right? That what are we looking at? Are we clicking, scrolling, or are we reading? Are we clicking, scrolling, or are we doing things with one another?
Right.
We need some eye surgery today. And probably the best eye surgery is to put down the thing that you're always trained to look to every moment.
All right. Well, we wrap up the show this week with the grade book. And so we want to, go back. Of course, one of the great traditions around Thanksgiving, the weekend surrounding there is a lot of the college football rivalry games. And I know you had a interesting time, I'm sure, Dave, watching Alabama, Auburn. A little bit of tension there, but it came out the way you wanted in the end.
It's great. That was a great game. I enjoy the way they do overtime. It's a little bit strange, right? Because you had a game like that where there were 10 points basically scored right up through, near the end of the fourth quarter. And then all of a sudden you have a outcome that's, 24-22 because they're lining up and put them in the 25-yard line or something like that and kind of let them go from there. So.
Yeah, and then they do 2-point conversions after the second overtime, which is a new innovation, but that's interesting too. So you just get this kind of rapid score, no score, and you get some weird numbers on the scores because you're going up by 2, which is not the normal football way of doing things. So yeah, what we're going to do though is look at some of the prizes that come out of those rivalry games and grade those. So, there's a million of these. Some are more obscure, some are better known, but we've got a selection of 4 of them. And I just want your grade, Dave, on the prize itself. And that can be related to the significance of the game, however you want to weigh those things. But we're going to start with one of the few college football games that's played on Thanksgiving Day. Of course, NFL usually is the major football story on Thanksgiving. But the Egg Bowl between Ole Miss and Mississippi State played annually on Thanksgiving Day. This year, both teams were ranked in the top 25. Ole Miss, who was 12, won over the 25th ranked Mississippi State, 31-21. And as a result, they get a Golden Egg trophy. How about that one, Dave?
Golden Egg.
Pretty good.
I'm going to give that a B-. Let's give it a B-. I don't know really what to, a golden egg.
Yeah. Well, okay. Actually, we were talking earlier about our tendency to divide, right? And brought to mind Swift and the Lilliputians, right? And do you break the small end of the egg or the big end of the egg? So you kind of wonder how that works with the Golden Egg trophy. Can you flip it upside down, or what's the proper orientation for that? So I think I'm going to give them credit for a deep literary reference there, and give them a B. Not the greatest of all trophies, but I kind of appreciate the sly humor in it. And whether there's any real connection between Mississippi and eggs, I don't know. But I like the fact that they're not afraid to call it the Egg Bowl.
Well, that's a Southern literary tradition, right? I'm sure the Southern agrarians. Yes,
that's right. All right, so now let's move to some games that were played on Saturday. So we've already talked about Auburn, Alabama in the Iron Bowl. And of course, you hear that, you think, wow, that must be a really cool trophy, right? Like some big hunk of iron that's passed back and forth. You can barely lift it, get some of those like massive outlaw trophy winning linemen, and 3 of them together have to lift this thing up, and they pass back and forth, all the great NFL players that have come out of those 2 programs. But actually, the trophy they play for is called the James E. Foy ODK Sportsmanship Trophy. So I don't know if you knew that, Dave, but as an Alabama fan, right, this should be something that's part of your knowledge of the rivalry. What do you make of that trophy as the spoils that goes to the victor of the Iron Bowl?
I just have to grade myself here because I give myself an absolute fail. I didn't know about the James E. Foy ODK. I have to now look at this, trophy, kind of marvel at it. So. Yeah, I've got some homework to do.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I looked this one up because I thought Iron Bowl has got to be the coolest trophy around. And then who knew, right? And it's a sportsmanship trophy, which speaking of sly jokes, right?
Sure.
2 programs that play to win, I think it's fair to say. I'm sure they don't mind a little sportsmanship, but they're not known for that. I don't think it's fair to say. Right. So I'm gonna give them a C for trying on that, but I don't think I can give much more than that for the James E. Foy ODK Sportsmanship Trophy. All right, now another well-known one, maybe not well-known teams in terms of their historic significance in college football, but we've got the matchup between Minnesota and Wisconsin, where they play, at least now, for Paul Bunyan's axe. Now, interestingly enough, until 1943, the winning trophy was called the Slab of Bacon. But then it disappeared when Wisconsin lost the game, was supposed to give it to Minnesota. I don't know, they ate the bacon, or they just didn't want to turn over, whatever happened. So for 5 years, there was no trophy. And then they came back with Paul Bunyan's axe, and that's what it's been ever since.
It's pretty hard to top a slab of bacon as an award. I mean, that's like an A++.
Yeah,
but I think an axe is a pretty good award. I got to give the axe an A. I think that just, I think that's a great thing to be able to have that axe in your house for that year if you've won. So, yeah, we need more things like a sword, axe, you name it, that type of thing. I think that does it for me.
Yeah, and to tie into a classic American tall tale as well, kind of suits the region, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the lumberjack. I think it does well. This would be like an A+ if Minnesota and Wisconsin were a better rivalry.
Right.
But it's definitely an A, right? There's no doubt the trophy is worthy. May the teams be worthy moving forward. All right, last one, which is actually yet to be awarded. The only three-way trophy competition that I know of, the Commander-in-Chief Trophy, contested annually between Army, Navy, and Air Force. And of course, the final culminating game of that series is always the Army-Navy game, this year being played on December 11th. Big pageantry, all the excitement. Of course, my dad having gone to the Naval Academy, this has been a big part of our family college football story. What do you think of the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy, Dave?
I like it. I like the three-way too. I mean, I think that it's interesting. What happens when they each win a game? How do they figure out the tie?
Yeah, so it's the holder keeps it basically. So that's
got it. Okay.
So that's I think the downside of it, honestly, is that you would like at the end of Army Navy to be able to give that trophy out or know who's got it, and of course Air Force may have already won it by that point, and then also some years there's kind of the ambiguity because you have a three-way 1-1-1. So if Navy wins this year, that's what we'll have. Will be a three-way 1-1-1.
I want point differential then added to that.
Okay.
So, the total points if it's 1-1-1.
Get a good tiebreaker.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. So that, Navy won it and they had to win by like 42 points and they're really just trying to run it up.
Yeah, that could be fun.
Might increase the rivalry as well. So
yeah,
I'll give that a solid B. It's no axe, no slab of bacon, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's an interesting and fun tradition sometimes when the president attends the game, Army Navy game. At halftime, the president switches sides, so sits with the one side for the first half, switches. There's kind of a ceremony that goes along with that. So, I mean, there's nothing like, in my mind, the Army Navy game as the single greatest college football game with all the show that goes around that and all just the ceremony and the rest. But the trophy to me is a little bit weakened by the fact that we have the kind of Air Force side carriage. I'd like there to be some kind of Army Navy thing that was settled on the field every year by them. Sorry, President Gibson of the King's College. But the Air Force is kind of tacked onto the rivalry. It's just not quite the same thing as it would be if it were just Army Navy, I think.
Could we add in like another brand, like maybe Coast Guard or something like that, or
let Coast Guard and Air Force fight it out? Yeah,
exactly. So, all right, there you go. Problem solved.
Problem solved. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thanks as always for listening and joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
2020 vision.